Well, good evening and welcome, sisters and brothers, if there be any, to If It Wasn't for the Women Bible Study Series in celebration and in honor of Women's Herstory Month. Her story in history, we're celebrating women and we are thankful for all of you who have joined us tonight. Shout out to all of the women who have already entered the Zoom room and for those who are steady streaming in. We thank God for all of you who have joined us tonight for this Bible study series. And of course, we want to give a special shout out to the Ray of Hope, Women of Ray of Hope, just a sister away, women's ministry at the Ray of Hope Church, where the Reverend Martine Espinosa is the pastor and Reverend Dr. Renita Weems is the co-pastor. We are excited about this week. Those of you who were on this call last week know that Dr. Renita Weems introduced herself on last week and blessed us in a tremendous way. And I'm excited about another rich time of not only study and impartation, but just this virtual gathering where we are sharing on tonight. Tonight, we thought it would be good since we are talking about women, and we talked to Dr. Cheryl Townsend Jilks on last week. Earlier this week, Dr. Weems and I discussed the possibility of inviting someone else, and we thought it would be fitting and appropriate to invite the Reverend Dr. Yolanda Pierce, who just recently released a book entitled In My Grandmother's House. We heard Bill Withers singing about grandma's hands, and I'm certain that I'm not the only one who has fond memories. We call my grandmother Madia, and I have fond memories of my grandmother, her informal theology, and all the ways that she shaped my life and continues to shape my life even after her death. We thought it would be great to invite Dr. Pierce to come and speak to us for a few minutes and share with us before the study starts. Dr. Pierce is the professor and dean of Howard University School of Divinity. She is the first woman to be appointed as the dean in the Divinity School's 100-year history. She is also the founding director of the Center for African American Religious Life at the Smith. She served, I should say, as the founding director of the Center for African American Religious Life at the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture, and previously served as the founding director of the Center for Black Church Studies and associate professor of religion and literature at Princeton Theological Seminary. She holds degrees from Cornell and Princeton University, and her research interests include African American religious history, womanist theology, African American literature, and race and religion. She's a widely published author with works that focus on the historical contemporary significance of the African American religious tradition. She has written over 50 critical essays and articles in academic and trade journals, which consider the relationship between religious faith, race, and gender in the American context. Her work has been published in Time Magazine, Christian Century, Theology Today, and Christianity and Literature. The recipient of numerous honors and awards, including fellowships from Ford Foundation, the Mellon Foundation, and the Pew Foundation. In 2015, she was honored to be selected as one of the Roots 100 Most Influential African Americans. In addition to her teaching and academic scholarship, Dr. Pierce is a dedicated mentor, community activist, board member of a foster care agency, and a cable news commentator. She's a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority, and she is a church girl. She was raised in the Church of God in Christ and still maintains a close connection with her Pentecostal roots. Would you help me, sisters, welcome Dr. Yolanda Pierce to our time of gathering on tonight? Good evening, Dr. Pierce.
Good evening. Thank you so much for that kind introduction. Folks will
It's
tell
all
all your
true.
stuff. I was like,
It's all good and it's all true. You
all
know,
your stuff.
we don't
Thank
ever
you
want to
so
take
much.
for granted that people know
That's
who's
right.
coming into our place, into
Thank
our
That's
you.
house.
correct.
That's
Thank
right.
you,
That's
ma'am.
right.
It's
So
so
we
good. Thank
celebrate all of
you.
your accomplishments. Thank
I
you so
appreciate
much
that.
for
I'm so
joining us
honored.
tonight.
I'm
Yes,
honored to
yes.
be here with you and with Dr. Weems. This is just an honor. It really, really is. And I was in the chat and I was saying hello to all of the Howard people, all the HU people, the HBCU peoples, you know, just giving a little love in the chat. So it's just a pleasure.
Of course. Well, sure. I'm sure that when Howard found out you would be on this call, we would have some Howardites on the call tonight.
Somebody.
Yeah,
And your
some
alma
witnesses
mater
on the
takes
call.
checks. So, you know, send your checks to your alma mater, okay? Listen, we got to keep our Black institutions alive, okay?
That's right. That is correct. That's correct. That's
That is
correct.
very
So,
true.
so tell us about your book, In My
Mhm.
Grandmother's House. I was fortunate to tune in to your webinar that you held on the day of your release with Dr. Weems, and it was great. But tell us about your book.
Well, thank you. And thanks so much to Dr. Weems, who
Mhm.
I said if I could choose anyone to begin the conversation, my virtual book tour, it was Dr. Weems. So it's an honor. So this is where I started. I was raised in a small storefront holiness Pentecostal church. So when I say I'm a church girl, some of you know that means Tuesday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, right? And one of my earliest memories as a child was being about maybe 5 years old and kneeling at the foot of my tiny little childhood twin bed, and my grandmother teaching me how to pray. And that memory stayed with me a long time. And so, you know, I got to school and did graduate work and PhD, and I'm a professional theologian. I'm a womanist theologian. They pay me to be a theologian, okay? But I realized as I was formally studying and training theology and now train men and women to do theology, that the foundation of everything that I learned did not come from Bonhoeffer. It didn't come from Niebuhr. It didn't even come from Cone. As much as I love these, Tillich, I love all of them. But started at the foot of that bed. And so what it birthed in me was a desire to write an everyday womanist theology that honored my grandmother, that honored the church mother. Some of you know the church mother tradition. We had a mother's board. So we had a straight up mother's board, you know, and to really then highlight what are those raw materials for doing theological work? What are the raw materials for the construction of theology for Black women? Right? And so as much as I read these theologians and Luther and Calvin, you read them all when you're in school, and they all have something to contribute. But I was being raised in an environment where Black women were giving me the raw material to do theological work. So how I understand salvation is through the lens of Black women, or how I understand Christology, Jesus on the cross, because I knew some Black women who called on the name of Jesus and believed that had power, right? And so it shaped my theology. And so I said, I'm going to write a book that I hope is accessible to mama, grandmama, auntie, all of them, to honor the women who have shaped my theology in such significant ways.
Wow. Wow. That's powerful. That is really powerful. It is. It's really powerful. Yeah.
And what you do so well, Dr. Pearson, a couple of things I'm going to ask you to do for our audience. If you would tell us what theology means, and secondly, your decision to make it, I think you've already said so beautifully, accessible and readable for everybody. So the ways in which you bring theology back to your grandmother and back to the women in the church, and you made a deliberate decision about that. And we have hundreds of women online right now who are all thinking women of faith, but they might want to know, what do you learn when you learn theology? And also sharing with them, hey, making a plug for divinity school. What do you learn when you go to divinity school that you that you didn't learn at the side of your grandmother's bed?
Absolutely. So, when I really think about what theology is, I'm at the very basics, which is about God talk, right? Which is about how we create certain systems to understand how God speaks into people, speaks to us, and also how we can talk back to God, right? And so again, back to my grandmother's house, I remember, so my grandmother, like probably many of you all, loved to cook, and I love to cook. I inherited that. And so she would be in the kitchen and she would be talking, and I'm like, who is she in there talking to? Because you would know as a child if you were being spoken to, that would be clear. But she was just being there talking and talking and so I watched this woman have conversations, and she said she's having conversations with Jesus, and I'm like, because I did not have a conception of a theological ideology where you talk to God and God talks back. Right.
Right.
And so this was so powerful for me. So one of the things that I really, really and feel so empowered about being a womanist theologian and teaching womanist theology is to, in fact, say to the folks who enter into seminary and enter into divinity school, is to say, you get to use an amazing array of raw materials to do your theological work. You get to have conversation partners across all walks of life and ages and eras, right? You get to study and immerse yourself in that. You can leave this place, this school, and go forward in that. But you've got to do two things, right? You've got to take seriously your origins, right? I would say in our terminology, I said, bless your origins. And so the education that I received at Princeton and Cornell and all of these places where I still want to be able to bless my origins, even as I can hold on to what I learned, what I've read, right? And so a few years back before he passed away, when Dr. Cone was still at Union, I actually spent a semester there as a visiting womanist theologian. And so really had this wonderfully rich time with Dr. Cone, and we're talking Black theology. And I'm like, man, I've read your books. Like, I know. And he was like, And he said, but this thing, as we were sitting in a restaurant in Harlem, he said, this is the heart of it, right? And so part of what I want us to be able to always do is to get to the heart of it, to make it accessible. I want you, for those of you, because I know several of the names on this chat, so I know many of you have theological education, but why I find theological education so powerful, because if you learn it well, you can explain it to a child. How do you know you've mastered something? The way you say, I mastered something, they gave me a master's degree. No. If you've mastered something, you know it so well, you could explain it to a child, right? And so what are those tools and resources we need to be able to do it? If you're in biblical studies, you need the languages. So Dr. Weems, this is part of why we honor you so much as an OG in the field, is because you have those tools and your resources that you got in your education, and yet you make it plain. And so when I read your work, I see it as a scholar, but I also feel it in my heart as a daughter of the church, right? As a mother, as somebody who had a praying grandmother. And so how do we operate on those levels? And that's what I want us to be able to do. You can get your learning and keep your burning, okay?
So this was, would you consider then, I mean, as I think you heard the intro song by Bill Withers, Grandma's Hands, and that beautiful tribute to the wisdom of grandmothers, the role model of grandmother, the inspiration of grandmothers, and mothers, and that mothering spirit also. All of us did not have the privilege of knowing our grandmothers. I did not grow up with my both of them had passed. But that's certainly, I think, what I think you do so well in your book is also you kind of putting your finger on that inherited wisdom that gets passed down from these women that maybe, I don't know if you say this, but that may be a little different from what we might get from our grandfathers. But if you might talk to us and share with us what what you're putting your finger, and I told you before, I just love your notion of grandmother, the theology of our grandmothers. So what would you say you're trying to put I think you've already said, but can you kind of drill down a little bit more to say, what is it that is unique about grandmother's wisdom? And it may be that we have lost some of that.
So I really, I could have talked about my mother's house, right? So I have
a
mother, you know, but the grandmother for me is a reference to the elders, right? It's a reference to generational wisdom. There is something, I am a mother of a daughter, and I'm doing my best, y'all. So you pray my strength in the Lord, right? And there's some stuff I can give her and some stuff that I can teach her, but there's some generational wisdom, right? That comes from someone older, someone wiser, someone who's been through what you've been through and what she's been through and has been, right? And so what I was really trying to point to was, this isn't about a relationship of flesh and blood, right? The grandmother theology, this sub branch of womanist theology, is about what do the elders get to teach the younger women? And that's, like I said, not necessarily a blood relationship, but that is about, have you seen something? Have you been somewhere? Have you been through something? Because if you haven't, you don't have anything to teach me. So it was really to say, and also, Dr. Weems, I know we touched on this, but for this particular audience, I want to say this, in a culture that glorifies youth, right? That wants us to be young and stay young and everything's you. I laugh because people talk about the millennials. Let's get the millennials involved. The millennials are now middle-aged. The millennials are now 40. They should have a mortgage and some kids. Y'all mean some young people. You mean some 20-year-old. That's a whole nother generation. So stop talking about the millennials. Millennials are middle-aged. I know because now I'm middle-aged now. But we glorify youth, right? And in a culture that even for Black folk, we say Black don't crack, but most of us trying to keep young and trying to keep fit and trying to, and so in a culture that glorifies youth, I wanted to remind people, well, where are our elders, right? In this moment of COVID, we've watched this. We've watched this actually happen in our churches and in our communities, that the digital divide in our own communities. We went online. Did the 80-year-old grandmama, did she go online with you? Who helped her to get online, right? And so I really wanted to point to something generational, something that connects us to our ancestors, that ancestral spirit. We have to stop being afraid of our ancestors as Black folk, y'all. That's something that white supremacy has tried to instill in us. Like, oh, they're talking about the ancestors, they're worshiping it. I have a deep reverence for ancestors, for those women, those men who went through, right? That ancestral reverence. That's my great cloud of witnesses. So wherever Fannie Lou Hamer is, right, wherever Harriet Tubman is, that ancestral wisdom, that's what I want us to tap into. I love innovation. I really am a child of technology. Y'all know I stay on Twitter. I mean, I love all of that. But in those midnight hours, I have to tap into something ancestral. Right?
Yeah.
And so let's call on that in a culture that is so consumed with, what are the 20-year-olds interested in? I want to sit at the feet of somebody who's been through something. And I want to hear what they have to say about this particular moment. So I'm just really intentional about that. I want to give honor to our elders, our forebears, our ancestors while we can. And I don't want to let certain kinds of ways in which white supremacy has come even into Black spaces to say, well, you don't want to do something that seems a little African. We African. That's who we are. We're the Black. And so that ancestral realm, that's who we are. Listen, y'all, listen. So that's what I'm trying to do here.
listen. I mean, you get the, we are, Dr. Pierce is not on just to talk to us about the book. She's also to be on to get us to purchase the book. So while we are yet talking, some of you could be getting on your browser, going to Amazon, whatever your preferred choice, and purchasing the book. So let Amazon and everyone else say, well, what happened? What did she appear somewhere? Is Oprah interviewing her or what? And we want
Okay,
to
send me to
yes.
Oprah.
We're going to speak
Michelle
that into
Obama,
existence.
somebody.
That's
Yes,
right.
me.
Oh, somebody is it, and they need to see a spike. We ought to purchase it. And
Tonight.
it is, I believe it
Tonight.
is in hardback, and you
Yes,
need it in hardback. Don't go waiting until it is paperback. You need it in hardback right now. So we want you to purchase it. It is a wonderful book. The whole point of her being on tonight as a part of our prelude to our Bible study is because we believe in supporting Black women writers, Black women thinkers, and Black women. We buy Black women's makeup, we buy Black women's hair bonnet, we go to Etsy and buy all that. Now we're saying buy the doggone book as well. And also because I love, and I'm going to ask you, we're going to close out on this question right here. But again, I'm strongly urging all of us that we purchase this particular book, and it will be ideal for your Bible studies. And I'm sure that Dr. Pierce, if she's available, and she is a dean, and a mother, and she has a lot of other things she has to do, but I'm sure she'll be available to be a part of your book club, to talk about the book. That's what happened. That's how the other women out there get their materials out there. Thank you so much, Ann Terry, and others of you who are saying, somebody, Christ Missionary, thank you for putting the link there. So you have no reason, if those of you who don't know how to go on Amazon, Christ Missionary has already found the link for you. Go there, purchase the book. But I want to close with this one question and let you close on this. But ultimately, your title of your book says Black Women, Faith, and the Stories that we inherit. And I think that story part of it is a good place for us to segue into our Bible study. So I want you to talk to us about why stories. And I think that would be important.
Thank you, Dr. Weems. And I'm staying on for Bible study, so I'll just be right over here in the corner. But stories are important. We live in a world in which often, as Black folk, and especially as Black women, we don't necessarily control the narrative of the story of our lives. That other people control the narratives. If we have a bad day, okay, they call us an angry Black woman. If a white man has a bad day and kills 8 people, they're like, oh, well, he had a bad day, right? And so I'm interested and invested in how we shape our narratives, how we control our narratives and share our stories. I'm a Pentecostal, but I have a high Mariology, which is to say I have a very high view of Mary in scripture, and I write about Mariology. And one of the reasons I write about Mariology is because I say for Black women, this is our story, right? And so how we use and shape and talk about and then pass on our stories so that we get to control the narrative, that we get to make the proclamation, I am made in the image and likeness of God with these hips and this skin and this body is made in the image and likeness of God. And so for us to tell our stories to each other, but also to the larger world, is to say, I am also beloved, and you can't forget about me within the body of Christ.
Yes. Won't you all thank me? Come on in the chat room. I think I heard a Memphis preacher say, text at me or a chat at me, something like that. We want to thank you, Dr. Yolanda Pierce. We want to thank you for your work. We want to thank you for the blood, sweat, and tears that it takes to write a book in the midst of all the other things that you're doing. And this very important, it brings theology and it makes it accessible to us. And it not only makes it accessible to us, but it also, as you said, bring Black women's stories to us and how we have talked about God. And these are the kinds of sources and resources that when I was coming through school, if you will, we did not have we had to look at fiction novels. But to get some idea what did Black women believe. But when you have something like in my grandmother's house, I think that this becomes an incredible resource, and it becomes an incredible resource for those of us who did not, especially who did not have our grandmothers and did not have that second generation removed from my mama, and all the issues related to mama daughters. that sometimes grandmothers can do. I mean, let me close with this. I was up the other night looking at This Is Us, on Hulu with Randall and Kate. Just wonderful. And now Felicia Rashad plays the mother-in-law. And it's beautiful the way. And I said, yes, the present. I miss the tension between the mother and the daughter is different when the grandmother is around, because the grandmother can translate some of that. And like Bill Withers says, to what you want to whip him for? He didn't drop no apple core, but I don't have grandma anymore. When I get to heaven, I'll look for her. And so she was also the one who translated for her daughter. Leave her alone. That's my grandbaby. Yeah, you mad at her, but I'll take care of her. So here's a little piece of candy, baby. And don't worry, grandmama got you. And so thank you so much. And so we're going to invite those of you who are listening, go ahead and write your grandmother's name in the chat box. Go ahead and however you refer to it, or whatever guardian spirit, ancestral woman was in your life. It may have been a next door neighbor. Thank you for those of you who are already, oh yeah, they're popping up in there now. So even if you didn't know her, in the spirit of the ancestors, call your grandmama's name, call your guardian's mother's name. Thank you, Dr. Pierce. You have blessed us. You have blessed us. Thank you so much. Now, thank you. Oh my, listen, I want to honor. This is, I wish I should be pouring libation right now. But yes, we will pour libations for all of those of you who are calling the names of your grandmothers, great grandmothers, Big Mama, Nana, Mud Dear, whatever her name was. They got now more cutesy names, more hip names, Nana, something else. There's some others. So thank you so very much. So we will now transition to the Bible study. And thank you very much to everybody for joining us tonight. We're here. Dr. Gina, if you wanted to say a little bit about the Bible study, if there was anything else that you wanted to say, but we are going to move on to the Bible study and welcome everybody to the Christ Missionary Baptist Church, if it wasn't for the women. And we'll go ahead and put the very first slide up. And we want to welcome you here on a Friday night. And I want to thank Christ Missionary Baptist Church with the Reverend Dr. Gina Stewart, who is the pastor, and those who work with her in bringing this Bible study here on Friday night. Those of us who want to rightly divide the word of truth, those of us who want to be thinking women of faith, those of us who want to look at scripture and look at context. And I think that is what Dr. Pierce also brought to our attention, looking at the context, that when she used the word womanist and talked about the ways, for those who may not know that kind of language, but those who understand the importance of using Black women's experience as even a way of us understanding scripture, that the Bible speaks to us at the level of our context as well. And Black women's context, and that it is all right for us to expect, want, and even demand that the Bible speak to us in the particularity of our context. And so that is what Friday night, during the month of Women's History Month, at the Christ Missionary Baptist Church. And I want to also welcome my own members from the Ray of Hope Community Church in Nashville, Tennessee. And many of you, I see the names of colleagues, friends, cut buddies, road dogs, all kinds of sisters in the room here on Friday night. We had over 400 of you registered. I'm sure that at least 200 of you, who are online. And here on a Friday night, I think this is the first week of, daylight saving time. So I'm looking at a little light on the outside out here as well. It was dark last week this time, but this week we are still in the light. And so we are taking this time. And I think Dr. Gina and I have talked about it before last week. What's the sense of being womanist? What's the sense of being senior women in ministry? Like Dr. Pierce, what's the sense of having PhDs, right? In these fields and not bring to our audiences the very best that we can bring to them. To dig a little bit deeper, that's my point, to go a little bit further into the Bible and to culture and to our beliefs. And so tonight, last week, we talked about the Wakanda experience, and I love this photo. You know, this is just these sisters. How many of you have seen the movie? Go ahead and just respond right there in the chat room. But I love this. I mean, these sisters are just fire. They're just fierce. I think over the next few Bible studies, I'm going to always use this photo. I don't care what I'm talking about. But I want to talk tonight. Dr. Weems wants to talk about sexism. Yeah. I think we've done enough work to talk about sexism. I want to talk directly about sexism and why it still persists in our churches, why it all persists in our churches, and how do we even kind of recognize it? And listen, it is a very dense PowerPoint that I have provided, but I'm Sean and Stacy, don't worry, we're not going to get through all of it. But you know, I'm a former professor, so you know I can pull together 40 slides in 15 minutes. That doesn't mean we're going to get through all of it. But listen, you all get your little water, get you some little Kool-Aid, and let's sit back and let's really talk about what we need to be talking about when we talk about what we talk about. And that is sexism in our churches. And what does it mean? I've said all the time, as we go to the first slide, I've said all the time, we recognize racism. We recognize racism. We can smell racism. We sense racism. We perceive racism. We are attuned. We have been trained to identify racism and to be on a guard for it. But I'm afraid that because I'm talking to Black women mostly, although I'm clear that it's not just all Black women on tonight, but there are 257 of you are on, and we're glad about that we are not as hyper vigilant, hypersensitive, not even hyper aware of what is sexism in the church. Racism for a lot of Black women is a sin. Sexism is, well, it's a bad thing, but it doesn't rise to the level of sin for many of us. And yet we are Black women. We are Black and woman. I have no idea what it means just to be a woman, whatever that is. And nor do I have an idea what it just means to be Black. Many years ago, Barbara Smith and some other editors wrote this beautiful book, a collection of essays, and you should find it if you can. All the women are white, all the Blacks are men, but some of us are brave. Whenever in the larger normative conversations, when they say women, they're usually talking about white women. And usually when they're talking about Blacks, it's usually talking about men. And Black women are often erased and invisible, but some of us are brave. And so tonight, for the time that is ours, for those of us who are serious, okay, if you came to read because you want me to teach about the book of Hebrews, or you want me to teach about the book of Exodus, or you want to talk about the book of Song of Solomon, or you want to talk about the book of Genesis, or the book of Ephesians, or you want to talk about the book of Zechariah, you can go ahead and click off right now, because this is not that kind. Touch your neighbor and say, this is not that kind of Bible study. We're going to look at our context and see how the ways in which religion and some of the isms of our society, how religion has been complicit in maintaining some of the isms that we live up under. How January 6th happened, how the hatred against Asian women this week, and the ways in which so-called evangelical, so-called religious, so-called nationalistic men use a notion of sexism that perceived Asian women as docile enough, weak enough that you can go in and shoot them up. It was not to a hookah bar or a smoking bar where Asian men might have been hanging out just smoking a cigar. No, he didn't go there. He went to where what presumably are docile, that the stereotype of the docile Asian woman, the stereotype of the weak Asian woman, and that is the sexism that I want us to look at. That the assumption that women are weak and docile, the assumption that women are supposed to be subjugated, the assumption that women are to be seen but not heard, the assumption that women are inferior to men, the assumption that women are seductresses and temptresses and whores and mammies. Those are the things that we have not known how to talk about in the church. Now, we talk about it a lot in the academy. We talk about it a lot on our jobs, but we have not known how, as thinking Christian women, to integrate that kind of conversation, because there are certain things we have been taught. That's what we're talking about. So women make up 16% of the leadership of Black Protestant churches, but they make up over, and I'm looking at Pew, over 70% of those who are in the congregation. That's things that ought to make you go, Things that ought to make you go, well, really? I hadn't noticed. Things that ought to make some of us notice that in some of our churches, thanks be to God, not in all of our churches, that in some of our churches, we've never seen a woman deacon. We've never seen a woman help to serve communion. We've seen them prepare the linen and prepare the elements, but we've never seen women stand across the aisles of the church. And you began to have to ask yourself, now why haven't I ever noticed that? We're talking about the things you never even noticed that's going on in that's sexist, that's male dominated, and you never noticed. I want to put my finger on the things you never noticed. The notion that, according to the Pew Foundation, 68% of Black adults said abortion should be allowed. But most of us have rarely heard a sermon about just reproduction. Let's just say reproduction. Next slide. Just say women's sexual reproduction. I intentionally put that slide up there just to harass you. Well, as we begin to click, let's just click and see. Did you know what? Did you know that Black Americans who attend religious services at least a few times a year are much less likely to have heard sermons on sexism? I mean, use the word sexism, or we can talk about racism. We can talk about Black and brown bodies, the murder of Black and brown bodies. We can talk about civil rights. We can talk about Black Lives Matter. We can talk about the Voting Rights Act. These are the ones where we're talking about racism. And we can talk about how wrong it is that Black people is still being oppressed. But sexism, I mean, calling it out as sexism. Oh, yes. They took a scripture on Mary Magdalene, but that's not the same as to talk about sexism. I won't let that sit in your spirit. Just because you preach on a scripture about women or that has a female protagonist doesn't mean that you have had any impact or said anything about structural sexism. Next point here. So most of us have never even heard the word. And although a majority of Black Americans believe that mothers and fathers should live in the same household, all of that, but we have to admit that in most of our churches, still most of the talk about money and power is usually about why our men ought to be more powerful, why our men should be the head of the family, why our men should be providers. And men should provide, but doesn't mean they should be the provider. There are ways, my point is, there is language that we use, and there is a kind of, as Dr. Pierce said, a kind of theology that we kind of use that perpetuates the notion of the invisibility of women, or at least the inferiority of women, or that women are second class, or that men are superior. Next point here. Again, just laying a foundation here. Likewise, 6 in 10 Black congregants say their houses of worship emphasize the need. Come on, somebody, get in the chat box and tell me, did you not grow up in this kind of culture? And if you're still in that kind of culture, and if that is really what you believe, go on and put that in the chat box as well. That men should be the role models in Black communities, while by a half say that there is emphasis on women. I wish now that I think about it, maybe we'll do it next week. But this whole notion within Southern Baptist, very conservative. I see Dr. Valerie Bridgman online, so she can do a whole class on this whole notion of complementarian versus egalitarianism. That the notion that women were created, men and women were perhaps created, the neo conservatives say, well, yes, they are equal, but they have different roles. Yes, they're equal. Yes, ultimately, they are equal, but they have different roles. A woman's role is called complementarian. We call that sexism, okay? But in egalitarian, that women and men have not only created equal, but that men and women, that God calls for both to flourish and to use their gifts and talents to the max, to ultimately to flourish. And there are no gender differences around our roles. That is, okay, again, I'm just kind of really giving the very basic, and Dr. Pierce can get in and say a little bit more about that. But that notion of egalitarian, I'm coming I'm walking hard here tonight. So next slide, I'm walking hard here tonight. I'm not gonna have 200 and something women here online tonight, and we're not gonna do Mary had a little lamb, his fleece was white as snow, and everywhere that Mary went. We're not going there tonight. That is for somebody else. We said last week, but have we moved the needle? Now this is moving the needle. I see some of you have already signed off. All right, baby, God bless you. Don't let the door hit you. Whether God, good God, but we are on tonight to talk about how religion, how our faith, how our Black churches have reinforced and justifies patriarchy. The ways in which, from Ephesians to 1 Timothy to Colossians, I don't have to, you know these texts far better than I do. But the notion in which, the notion of the headship, that just because Adam was quote unquote created before Eve, therefore that who came first, it suggests who is the most powerful, or who is superior. I know we all come from families where the mother had 2 or 3, 4 children, but the oldest child is not the superior child, but that has been ascribed, that the scripture doesn't say that, but we have reinterpreted that back in, or that Jesus only had all men as his disciples, and there were no women, and so therefore Jesus only. I'm just talking about the ways in which, within Christianity, clearly this is a discussion as we go to the next slide. We're talking about the ways in which. Have you ever just kind of thought about that? The way, and I want to interpret some of these terms. I said I'm walking hard tonight. I'm walking hard tonight. One of the things about these kind of Bible studies, especially with Dr. Gina invites me, you're getting, and when Dr. Pierce was on early, and then Dr. Cheryl Townsend Jukes was on last week, you all are getting in an hour and a half what divinity students pay $30,000 and $40,000 a year to get. You get trained scholars coming on and sharing at what seminarians get for a whole semester. So we walking heavy right now. And for those of you who are like, oh, I just wish I could go to seminary. Oh, I just wish I had the money to go. Well, come to Friday night Bible study at the Christ Missionary Baptist Church, and you can get some. And you can at least get a foretaste of glory divine. Misogynism, sexism, patriarchy, how they all are intertwined and intersect with one another. And probably I could have put patriarchy as the largest one, and misogyny and sexism within it. Next slide right here. Walking heavy here. That's right, Pam, and others of you. Patriarchy. We live in a patriarchal culture. What is a patriarchal culture? It is a cultural, well, that, I mean, I'm really, I got to calm myself down so I can really, so those of you who have sat under us, who are reading now, you've been home for a whole year. You've been accessible, access to the internet the whole year. You're reading all these articles and you're online on scrolling on Facebook, and you're seeing people use these words like patriarchy. And like, well, what is the rule of the father, the headship of men? When a society, cultures and societies that are organized around men being the normative ones and women being invisible, that the whole of our society is organized around male power, where the lineage is organized around the rulership of men. That I was just telling my husband earlier this week, and let me see if he's here. Can anybody? Well, I'm not going to go into that. I'll just say, my name is Renita Weems. My husband's name is Martin Espinosa. And whenever someone asks me, they don't ask me as much as they used to ask me. So why didn't you take your husband's name? Now, I'm not talking, I'm not throwing shade of you who quote unquote, took your husband's name, whatever that means. But these are the remnants, these are the residuals of our patriarchal society. Now, you didn't even know that. Well, that is what patriarchy is about. It's the stuff you didn't even notice. You didn't even know the question. It is the stuff of when we find, even I watch a lot of basketball, so now that's beautiful. I watch a lot of basketball, and so I love it when I see on the back of the guy's jersey hyphenated names. I said, well, look at that. His name is Jones Washington. I mean, and it's got to be all over the back of his name. And the ways in which people, there are women who there are families where there's an attempt to combine both names. I'm not throwing shade. I'm just trying to say the residuals, of patriarchy, that the children's name. Did she have, she had a baby by so and so. But my husband, who's from Trinidad, I used to argue with him. They used the word she had a baby for. I said, we don't say for here in the United States. We say by. Oh, he said, does it really make a difference? I said, I guess it really doesn't make a difference. Mama's baby, daddy's maybe. That's the language of patriarchy. The notion that well, go on to the next slide. We live in a patriarchal culture. It is a system. We're talking about a system now, where before, go ahead, ableism and sexism, keep going, and go ahead and click it some more, Sean. Racism, all of these things really come up under patriarchy, the rule of a few over the many, the rule of a few men, wealthy men, enfranchised men, patriarchy. Elitism, patriarchy, classism, it all is up under a kind of hierarchical notion that there are some in power and there are others who are not. Some men and other men are up under them, but those men who are up under them are above the women who are below them. Come on, somebody. Next slide. Homophobia. All of these are isms, subsystems up under patriarchy. Sexism. Roses are red, violets are blue. Okay, listen. What is that? And that little saying that we have about pink and blue and about the girls, and it's just blowing my mind. I just completely just that's what Papa Dog tells. That's what. Everything nice, and Papa Dog Tales and whatever. You all know, I'm going fast. Somebody put it up in there. Yeah, little boys are made of snails. That's right, sugar and spice and everything nice. These reveal parties. What's up, y'all? I'm in my 60s. What's the reveal party? Why what? And then if it's pink, we're gonna have pink smoke. And then if it's blue, it's gonna be blue smoke, because we want to know the gender. And already, I'm like, listen, number one, I'm 67. I don't go to no reveal parties. I don't care nothing about nobody having no baby who in her 20s when I'm 67. I ain't going to that. And excuse the party. Thank you. All right. But reveal party. Now, if you had a reveal party, I'm not talking, I'm not throwing shade, baby. I'm on a roll right now, okay? So a hit dog was just gonna have to holler. So that notion, snakes and snails and puppy dog tail, right? Already, what is the gender? And once we get, my point is, once we get the gender in our mind, we're already beginning to operate on what her color is going to be and what kind of toys and what kind of things we're going to put on the wall. We're already reinforcing certain notes. She has to have pink, and he has to have blue. You cannot put pink on his wall because he's a boy. I am talking about the ways in which we don't even know we are participating in some of that. Sexism, the prejudice and stereotyping and discrimination, typically against women on the basis of nothing else than their gender or sex. Sexism. It is you not being able to make as much as the man on your job, and you're doing the same job. And in fact, you're more qualified than he is. That is called sexism. That you have to have your husband or your father to verify or in order to purchase anything or to get a bank loan or to get a car. Back when I was growing up, that was called sexism. The notion that a woman cannot preach from the pulpit, she has to preach from the floor. That's called, this is the discrimination against women based just purely on the fact that she's female. Sexism, misogyny, but it is definitely the scent of misogyny. Misogyny is what we saw this week. Misogyny is the death of Breonna Taylor. Misogyny this is not discrimination. This is contempt. Okay, I want to go a little bit deeper here. Sexism is what you do. Misogyny is the rage. It's the hatred. It is the contempt for women. There was a book, and I used to do a workshop called Men Who Hate Women and the Women Who Love Them. Men who hate women and the women who love them. That is misogyny. When you not just with somebody who's sexist and who was raised, and he's raised believing that women are that he should be the provider and he should make the final decision. That's sexism, and that's a war already in the marriage or in the relationship. And again, I'm talking very heterosexist. I'm a cisgender woman, so permit me to use these kinds of examples. But I mean, when you get a sense that he does, I mean, he hates me. No. This isn't just ingrained kind of sexism. This is, I mean, when he starts hitting me, he got to cuss me out. There's something else going on. Yeah, he's mad at womankind. His mama left, and he's mad at all women. He mad. He can't stand having no female supervisor. He don't want to hear a woman preach. No, I ain't coming that Sunday. I ain't coming that Sunday. No, I don't want to hear that woman preach. That's more than sexism, baby girl. Women who love, men who hate women, and the women who love them. Next slide here. I'm just going to keep on moving through my slides. I'm talking about why it persists in our churches. Sexism is an ideology that supports patriarchal society relation, but misogyny enforces it when there's a threat of that system going away. Sexism is the ideology, but misogyny reinforces it. Misogyny of this week of going into that parlor, that spa. I don't care if it was a spa. I had to ask somebody, what was it? What is it? Was it a spa? Was it a nail salon? Was it a massage parlor? And so it doesn't matter what it was. There were women in there who were vulnerable, who were there doing what they do with their work. And he made the calculated decision to go in and kill them at 150 miles outside of town on his way to do it some more. Next slide. Misogyny. When you target women, when you target my daughter, when you target women, when she's walking down the street and all the cat calls, sisters, that is not cute. That is not romance. You ain't fine. You a target. You ain't that good looking. You look all right. But that is reinforcing the subjugation of women, that reinforcing that the bodies of women, that you're only as good as your body looks. Next, just go ahead and click. Why is sexism difficult to eradicate? It's easy to talk about the men. Let me talk about those of you who don't want Gina Stewart as your pastor. Now, you like her for Women's Day. You love her for Women's Day. But let her candidate for your church. Now, Christ Missionary is not going to lose Gina Stewart. But let her candidate. We're talking about how how even the women in the church benefit from sexism. Sexism, how we participate in it, how we kind of like it, how we kind of benefit from it, how I think I mentioned to you all last week, my example was my daughter. Did I say my daughter? I didn't mean to say that working for people who don't even understand the use of their power to open doors for other women, use the use of their power to make sure other women are getting paid fairly. What the sense of you being the pastor of the church or the president of the organization if you're going to out Pharaoh? If you're going, I know you got babies and I know you're a single mother, but I need you in here at my job. I know your child is sick, but honey, I don't play that. You just going to have to come to work. I see. So this image right here, I love this image. In the Western world, we think that we are free because we can show our bodies. We think we are free because we don't have to wear the veil. We don't have to wear the girdle. We don't have to cover up our bodies. We think that we are free. Oh my God, because we can get our own credit card. We can walk down the street as tight as every now and then. And I know it's because I'm an old woman. Now believe me, I know it's because I'm an old woman. Every now and then, even I have to say, now baby, cover it up. Sometimes I have to look in this, and I think about men from foreign cultures who are not accustomed to women wearing what we wear. I do have to ask myself, when women and men from other cultures who are more modest, what do they think when they see us in our spandex? What do they think when they see us with our cleavage? I'm not knocking. I'm just saying it must strike them as, my God. My God. But at the same time, do I not look at the woman who's completely covered saying, now sis, aren't you hot up in there? And so on one level, I know this is delicate, and but I'm trying to make a larger point. But we look at the woman who's covered, when she understands that as being modest. She understands that as only her partner, her husband, her lover should be able to see what we feel like, hey, I'm free. And then she looks at us and she's looking at, oh my God. And we're looking at her. And I'm talking about the ways in both societies are sexist and patriarchal, and there's misogyny. Whether you cover it up or whether you let it all hang out, you have not changed a system of the ways that even our uncovering, it is for the male gaze. It is for male approval. No, we're not wearing our bikinis for our girlfriends, unless you're same gender loving, and go for it. But let me go on to the next slide. I'm moving. I'm just, Dr. Gina, just let me know. So why does sexism and misogyny persist? It's embedded. That is what we're talking about. It is embedded in our culture. Well, that's just the way things are. Well, racism and segregation just the way, and segregated schools was just the way the notion that women could not vote in 1918, it was just the way the things are. Somebody got to look and say, but why? It's institutionalized. Men and women both benefit from sexism. Men are privileged and some women are rewarded for their complicity. Women are rewarded for their complicity. Women are, when we get into positions of authority and we are as discriminating against women, and we are rewarded. Systemic is intersectional. I can't go through all of these, but it is supported and legitimated ultimately by religion, which lends it an air of being here. Listen to this, divinely ordained. It's not just the way it's not just the way things are, but it is the will of God in Christ Jesus. This is the way. Well, this doesn't the Bible say? Well, doesn't the Bible say patriarchy exists not because of what the Bible said. Patriarchy is pre-biblical. Patriarchy, the Bible helps to reinforce it. But patriarchy is that cultures that are not even Christian are patriarchal, who never even heard of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Jesus, Paul, nor Peter are patriarchal. Cultures have over the centuries evolved into being male dominated. But Christianity and some other religions, Judaism, Islam, have their tenets of their faith have normalized, have divinized, sacralized, made ordained patriarchy. But you don't have to be Christian. You don't have to be Muslim. You don't have to be Islamic, Muslim, excuse me. Next slide. Patriarchy exists. But there are those of us who are in ministry, and I'm moving here quickly now. Those of us who are in ministry, women in ministry, especially though, and a few good brothers, we are always on the lookout for stories of women in the Bible. That's why we, as Dr. Pierce said, stories are important. That's why we are constantly trying to retrieve stories. Yes, the image of the Jezebels. Yes, wonderful. We talked about that last week in the Southern Baptist Church, calling Kamala Harris Jezebel. And using certain kinds of images and language that are pejorative, toxic, that are inflammatory. So we're constantly trying to look for stories in the Bible. That's what Justice Sister Wade, my book, and that's what grandmother, Dr. Pierce's book, In My Grandmother's House. We're constantly trying to retrieve stories where we give you examples of women who came up against the kind of male-dominated society. Perhaps however subtly, however subversively they had to do it, some much more boldly than others. But there are these little stories here and there. I'm not going to go into those. This is not that kind of Bible study. Next slide. Or to click it, let's see what's over there on the side. Yeah, Zelophehad's daughter, and all of those. We're talking about the stories. We are constantly on the lookout for stories to give you an idea. Not all women were invisible. Everybody in the Bible was not the Levite concubine who was slaughtered and divided up into 12. Every woman in the Bible was not stoned to death. There were some women who persisted. Some women, they did not necessarily change the whole culture, but they did what they could do. And I said to you before, everybody's not called to be a prophet, but there will be times in all of our lives when we will have to take a prophetic, social justice, righteous stand. You don't have to be a prophet nor a preacher to take a stand. Next slide. So I love this one. I didn't even put a caption on it. There is, to the extreme left, that's equality. Okay, we're going to make everybody equal. We're going to put the little stand under them, and everybody's stand is going to be the same size. That's equality. We're not That's not what we are advocating for. We thought we were. That is part of our language. But if it's equality, then but we do not come in the same sizes. Our issues and our oppressions are not the same. What Asian Americans and what Black Americans and what Native Americans are suffering from, the histories of our oppressions are nuanced and slightly different. Oh yes, there are oppressions, but there are different ways in which, and different histories. And so it is not equality. But let's look at the next one here. Perhaps the next one is, I believe, I remember my slide from a long time ago. Perhaps, go ahead and click the next part, if you will, Sean. I believe we get the little, go ahead, yes. The assumption that everyone benefits from the same supports. I'm gonna give everybody $1,200. Everybody gonna get a stimulus check, $1,400. Now, when Renita Weems gets a $1,400 check, and when my sister who lives on Medicaid in Atlanta gets a $1,400 check, that's different. That's not the equality. I don't need that. I'm gonna take my $1,400, but I don't need the $1,400 the way that my sister, who did not finish college, needs that $1,400. That's equality. In the middle is equity. Everyone gets the support that they need. Okay, that's good. I like that. Everybody, listen to this. This is equity. Everybody gets the support that they need in order to look over the fence. But let's look at what justice is. Justice is remove the doggone barrier. Remove the barrier. Remove the barrier. Take down the wall, period. Don't put steps up anyway. If there's somebody disabled, just don't even put up no steps. Make everything one level. I don't know. I'm just saying that. But there is equality, there is equity, but just remove the barrier. And we wouldn't have to have Title IX. And we wouldn't have to argue about women's sports. We're not asking you to give us the same thing that the men get. Just remove the barriers completely. This is what we're talking about. This is what we're trying to advocate for the sisters who are online right now, to help us make it easier for those of us who are in ministry, who preach, who pastor, who are your supervisors. If we all understood who the real enemy is. Next slide. Where the real argument is, where the real enemy is. Yes, equality, equity, and justice. Justice is remove, not just reform, but remove. Get rid of, remove the barriers. Next slide. Thank you so much. I'm going to go through it. The hypermasculinity. Come on, next slide after that. Go on. Let's go on. All right. Misogyny is alive and it just hurt I didn't even want to put that thing's photo up in here. But since he's just he's the embodiment. He is the icon of the hyper-masculine. Do you know that many people, many of these people follow him because of his hyper-masculinity? Because he was so obnoxiously, oh my God, I will never forget that image right there. I mean, I couldn't believe we're looking at a presidential debate. When did such thing ever happen? Even if he despises women, even if you despise, there is a kind of way you comport yourself. Misogyny. Next slide. I'll never forget that image right there. That was another of our signs that we were in a hellhole and we were about to go through an ish hole for the next 4 years. This fool felt comfortable on a presidential debate to stalk her. We all should have gotten on that boat and gone back to Liberia, that next one, because we are in trouble. Beam me up, Scotty. He was already showing us who he was. That's right, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And so this man, oh my God. Let's just go on to the next slide. I can't stay there no longer, but I just had to. Invested in keeping women in their place. Invested in keeping women in their place. This is not just optics. This was the agenda, at least one of their agendas. Next slide. It was very clear. And it is based upon, it depends upon our not saying anything, not doing anything, being complicit, pretending we don't see and not know what we know when we know it. When men make us silent and women keep us silent. Now, baby, you know he didn't mean that. Now, ooh, Lord, and why y'all come? Well, if he did it 29 years ago, what you just bringing it up for now? Lord, that was 14 years ago. Silence. But as Audre Lorde said, our silence would not protect us. Next slide here. Patriarchy and sexism depend upon silence, acquiescence, complicity. I didn't want us to, I'm going to talk a little bit more about this next week with feminism and womanism, but I'm not, just in case there's some of you who don't come on next week, I wanted to talk about misogynoir. And I want to talk about that there is a particular kind of, because most of us, I think, are Black women. How many of you have never heard this word before? And it's okay. That's why you get teachers like me, Cheryl Jukes, and Yolanda Pierce. But misogynoir, we know about misogyny. But I want to thank Moya Bailey for coining, a Black feminist scholar, for coining the word misogynoir. There is a certain kind of virulent hatred and discrimination against Black women that's even different from the discrimination that white women have to endure. A kind of rage and how dare you kind of a sense that we sense that black women are the targets of. And so she coined the word. It's not just misogyny. It's not just misogyny, but she used, and it was very clever, noir, the French word for Black. It is anti-Black racist misogyny that Black women experience. Vile, that's right. I have not heard of misogyny. Thank you, that's all right, that's good. That's why we are here tonight. That's why Dr. Gina has us all in here together. A kind of, in your own head, even if nobody else will understand it, but in your own head, the next time we see the kind of virulent calling Kamala Harris Jezebel, in your head, you'll be able to say, that's what she means by misogynoir. That's what they mean when they say a kind of virulent hatred and animus against Black women that is excessive, that is on display. Next slide. I'm moving fast here. And that even white women participate in. Thank you, Angela. That even white women participate in. Not all white men, good women, God Almighty, not all white women. But where are all the white women when Black women? Where are those who rolls for us? Who's willing to give up some of their privilege for us? Thank you, Racine, Wisconsin. Next slide. I know I'm abbreviating or attenuating a lot, but how has this generation of women in executive church leadership impacted the church? How will Dr. Gina know? She has not ever heard me speak, particularly if I'm doing a PowerPoint, and I'm not going to answer that question. So what's the uptick of all? Okay, so we all are here in church leadership. We're all online. I'm seeing names of women, those of you who are the executives in your own organization. You are business women. You own your own businesses. Some of you are pastors, some of you are professors, but had the needle moved? Next slide. Has the needle moved? Have we changed the institution? I know you got a good job. I know you are a pastor. I know you are a bishop. I know you are an apostle. I know you are a CEO there at Citizens Bank or there at SunTrust. But I mean, I'm talking about for those who are coming behind you, baby girl. How will we be remembered? Is it just us and no more? Just me and my girls on my line, who were my line girls. Have we made it a little bit easier? Next slide for the next group. If you have not, then you have not made a dent in patriarchy. And it takes more than a few of us. Be clear. But it is the combined force. I thought I would just put this up here because I thought I'd just mess with everybody, including Dr. Gina. I just want you all to know. I was telling someone the other day, I just want you all to know we are not all the same. And that's a good thing. But y'all ain't discriminating. Valerie, help me out here. Yolanda, help me out here. Y'all, those of you who know me, one of the things, Dr. Weems, I wear compliments like a loose garment. Dr. Weems, oh Lord, when you hear some of us speaking, you all are all on your face. Oh, she's bringing it tonight. Oh, she's walking heavy tonight. Oh, she's fired tonight. You should hear so and so and so. Oh, Lord have mercy. You know why I don't pay any attention? You know why I don't even scroll and read comments? Because y'all say the same thing about Joyce Meyer. I'm saying, what? They don't even see a difference. Our theologies are totally different. Oh, okay. Okay. So we listen and pay attention to the theology. Listen and pay attention to, I don't care how slim down Joyce Myers get. I don't care what kind of facelift she get. I don't care how nice she look. Sometimes I look at her and say, whoa, this is how she looked 20 years ago. Okay, she didn't have a little facelift. But they real clear about how you're supposed to look. Because that's part of the patriarchal image. But y'all don't even be listening to this just soft patriarchy. I remember I used to be conservative evangelical. I used to listen to her. But I just liked the fact that she was just not your typical white woman. I just love the fact that she looked to me like this, that she looked like she could smoke a cigarette and drive an 18-wheeler. And I said, I like this woman. But because I love those kind of women. Okay, that's me. I like that kind of, but I've watched how she's had to be marketed in order to stay in the media, how she had to stay in front of the camera. I've seen how she's had to change, but yet her theology is still, when you think about it, it's soft patriarchy. It is basically reinforcing conservative theology, women's roles. There are some little tweaks here and there, but basically she ain't coming up against the men. Those are her sponsors. The Paula Whites, come on, y'all. You see the woman in the white. Paula Whites. We know some of your pastors had her in that church until she showed herself to be who she was always. She was so from the beginning. They are not Gina Stewart and Vashti McKenzie. Now I know this is technology. Some of y'all can take a photo right now and say, oh, and the next thing I know, it's on somebody's Facebook page, and other people like, well, oh, but I like her. I didn't know that was a problem. So I know one of the things about having this kind of stuff is it can get out and it gets misinterpreted what I'm trying to say. But I'm saying, listen, that we are not standing for the same thing. Next slide, very quickly. The next slide as well. Listen. I thought I'm really messing with y'all. Everybody ain't the same. Everybody's theology is not the same. I don't care how many nails you put on us, how many tracks you put in our head, how much lipstick, how beautiful is our pedicure, and we love all of that. But y'all ain't paying attention to what they selling. And everybody is not for women's freedom, women being equal. Get your belt. Everybody's theology. Listen, I don't care how pretty they are. I don't care how smooth, though they speak with the tongues of men and of angels. Listen to some of that theology. I love the fact that Beth Moore, I'm new to her, but I have some sisters who tell me, no, Dr. Weems, I used to really listen to her. I mean, and she's taking a righteous stand. stepped away, dropped out, resigned from the Southern Baptist Church. I have not listened to her a whole lot, but I'm told that she really is a good sister. I want to believe that. Those of you who know of her, please do say that. I have not followed Beth Moore, and so I included her because I am told that. I mean, I did see where she talks about resigning from the toxic theology of the Southern Baptist Church, the racist, homophobic. So I put her up there. But pay attention. I love me some Danielle, righteous sister. And that's why I want to put young sisters up in here as well. Beth Moore is a great teacher. Okay, fine. And I'm not saying she's not. I don't know whether she is or not. So I'm thanking Leah Daughtry. She's that's fine. I'm really not trying to juxtapose and say she is not. Now I do have a problem with Myers, Joyce Meyer, Carla White, absolutely. So I'm not trying to play. She's not on this slide in the same way that I tried to use the other slide. But I am asking us to have a more discerning spirit is what I am asking, and paying attention. Next slide. And I'm willing to take heat. I'm willing to have conversation. I'm willing to, I only have a few minutes, so I got to provoke you to good works. I got to provoke you. If you're not, I need somebody to leave this Bible study tonight mad. Somebody ought to be just a little irritated with Renita Weems. I mean, and that's good. That is good. Somebody will say, well, I disagree with that. And I don't know why she put her up there, because she really, that preacher, okay, I just look for some photos. Okay, let's just get, that's right. Top right was Sarah Jakes. And I don't really know. I have some sense of her theology. I do, but that's I'll let the young people. But I love, we are this photo right here, this sister right here. I don't know where she is, but I want to bow before her feet. I love this sister, speaking truth to power, standing up, and it will take, not all of us can do this, but all of us ought to have her back. I say it again as I get ready to close. You all know I say that 12 times before I actually close. That's right, she ain't scared. I say it again, the women who do that kind of work right there tend not to be women that the rest of us like, because we've said it over and over, well-behaved women do not change history. It is the women who won't be quiet. It's the women who you otherwise. Let me quickly tell this story. Many years ago, I spoke somewhere, and at the end of the message, I was speaking for the National Council of Negro Women, with McLeod, not McLeod, but Miss what was the woman? I'm having an old woman, Height, Dorothy Height. Thank you, baby. She had invited me in, and I'm calling the roll at the end of my speech of the great Black women down through the history, the great cloud of witnesses. And I mentioned Miss McLeod Bethune, and I go on and come to a close. Everybody is thunderous and applauding me. This one older woman came up to me at the end and said, "You didn't know Mary." Excuse me, ma'am. She was not all that you think that she was. Mary was a difficult woman. I said, okay, yes, ma'am. And you can tell she was from her generation. This is like sometime in the late 90s. And so, that her Mary generation was still living. This woman was very old, but she made it very clear. Everybody didn't like Mary McLeod Bethune, and everybody did not appreciate her tapping Dorothy to be the president. I said, ooh, if I had time, I would want you to tell me this whole Black story. But I didn't have the time, and I was young, too young to say, pull the tea and tell me what happened. But the point was, Mary McLeod Bethune was a pistol. And women who do that kind of work tend to be strong personalities, difficult women. They are rarely well behaved. That's all my point is. Everybody can't do what this sister is doing. But she ought to know she's got women behind her who will support her. Next slide. I want to close with this as I drink some water. Some of you have heard me do this sermon. I say, talk about the way religion is complicit Scriptures, and certain scriptures are complicit. The ways in which scriptures have been used. You all have heard me do the story behind the story. If only the disciples had the courage to elect Mary Magdalene to replace Judas, perhaps the church, perhaps we would have had our earliest example of women leadership. When Judas killed himself there in the Gospels, and it was time there in the chapter 1 and 12 through 26, and they were all huddled together, and Peter decided it was time to replace Judas, and they cast lots, and the lot fell to some unknown dude named Matthias, when the only person in the room who should have been elected and appointed and elevated should have been Mary Magdalene. And oh, how the church might have been, how we might have made perhaps that if Mary Magdalene had been elected a disciple, appointed and voted in as a disciple in the book of Acts, I'm saying to you that the early church, that the Jesus movement, the way might have been made a little easier for women in those first centuries and our later century. If only Peter Nim, was somebody right up in there, Peter Nim, how you spell Nim? If Peter Nim had had the courage to elect Mary Magdalene, perhaps 2,000 years later, we wouldn't still be asked at this age, Gina, Valerie, Leah, does God call women? At 2,000 years later, we still fighting this, arguing this, being asked this. Someone asked me this on a panel the other week, and I said, baby, I'm so old, I haven't heard that question since I was in the Pentecostal church, since I was in very, very, very conservative churches. Since I was hanging with conservative people, I don't even know. Nobody asked me with gray hair at this age and this amount of accomplishment, do women? Baby, you asked the little girl, darn. But when you dare to ask somebody who is senior that, I'm like, oh, okay. If only the disciples had had the courage. I didn't say it would have been a perfectly egalitarian church. I just said that they had just given us one example, one unequivocal example. One unequivocal, we wouldn't say, well, you see, but I know it was 12 male disciples, but Mary Magdalene, and that in Luke 8, 1 through 3, I'm not talking about, well, we've got to append. We got to talk about they were appendages, and so therefore they were disciples. I'm not talking about osmosis kind of exegesis. I'm not talking about exegesis based on what we got to deduce that they were there. But it was a clear example, asterisk, a postscript exegesis. If only. So that's my last slide I want to stop with. And I want to say, when you have an opportunity, do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly before your God. When you have the opportunity, do right. Take the righteous, courageous stand, because sometimes it's not about that moment right there. It's about generations on down the road. If only the disciples had elected Mary Magdalene, perhaps 2,000 years later, we would not still have denominations and churches that are arguing and splitting around issues of sexuality and gender. We would not be having to deal with toxic churches and toxic deacon boards. We would not, perhaps, I'm just saying perhaps, I know it's more complicated and it's more nuanced than that. But tonight, as Dr. Gina comes on, I'm not trying to shout you. I'm not even trying to tie it up in a bow. I'm trying to provoke us. I'm trying to lay hands on us and provoke us to think in this women's Bible study, the ways in which sexism persist in our theology and in our churches and in our cultural practices, and the ways in which we have benefited, the ways that we have normalized it, the ways in which we have ordained it and sacralized it, and the ways in which even thinking women on this Bible study tonight, I just didn't know. Dr. Yolanda, please come on. And you are the theologian. Come and share with us. I mean, I'm glad to see you on. If you can help us just kind of sum up some things, and I'm not asking you to do the broad work, but you can help us.
Dr. Weems, so you've blessed us, right? Because part of what you are reminding us of is that our context matters, right? And the world in which we live in, and the environment in which we live and move and have our being matters. And that for so many of us, we're so ready to march. We're ready to march. Our brothers, are they being shot in the street? Yes, they're being shot in the street. Some of us don't even consider the own conditions and circumstances under which we live and under which we minister, under which we are trying to be in this world. And so such a powerful reminder. We've got to take this seriously. And the reason we have to take this seriously, because you said it, this is about the work of justice. Right? I would be hard pressed. Brothers, I grew up with my brothers, and one of my brothers came to me and said, sis, this police pulled me over. He stopped me. He forced me to get out of my car. He forced me to lay down on the ground. This is a grown Black man, and I know his story is true. I want to be believed when I say this is what I've experienced in this body and in this flesh. This is about justice. This is about justice for all of us. I tend to think, and this is the only thing I'll say because I know Dr. Stewart's here and will come on, but the one thing that you made me think as you were talking about, the patriarchy is a system.
It's a system.
It's not men, right? Because sometimes I just want to say this, and not that you need a defense, Dr. Weems, you don't need it at all. Sometimes when we talk about patriarchy, oh, y'all don't like men. I love men. Let me, okay, that's part of the problem, okay? This is not about men. This is about systems and structures and powers, and how sometimes we participate in the patriarchy.
Yes.
And so when you find yourself a place that is truly preaching freedom, living into freedom, the one who has called us to be free and free indeed, that's a place that you want to be, right?
Yes.
And so the dismantling of patriarchy, that's not disrespecting our brothers. I tell people, so I'm at a historically Black college and university, right? And I say to people, we're unapologetically Black. Now you're welcome. You are welcome, race, creed, stripe, you are welcome to come along with us if you want to get free. But we're going to be unapologetic about who we are. But if you want to get free, come along with us. And so I'm simply saying that the patriarchy is not the men. The patriarchy is not an individual. It is a system. And when we dismantle the system of patriarchy, then the least of these are free. And when the least of these are free, we're all free.
Yes. And it's just like when we talk about whiteness, we're not talking about white people. We're talking about the system of whiteness. We're talking about how white people benefit from a system that rewards whiteness. We're not talking about man, a particular man, that we're talking about a system that benefits maleness. And that is what patriarchy is about. That because he is male, not because he earned it, not because he did anything, but by virtue of him being a male, or by virtue of this person being white,
right?
That they earned, or they are accrued certain kind of benefit. We're talking about systems, and we're not talking about individuals. We wrestle not against
Yes.
individuals.
Yes.
We wrestle against systems,
Forces,
power,
principality,
principalities.
high
That's
places.
what we're trying to dismantle.
Yes.
The systems that reward people based on their givenness and not based on merit or in other kinds of things.
Yes.
I hope that is helpful. I believe that could be helpful. I hope this is particularly helpful for those of us who perhaps have never thought about these kinds of things and need to weigh these things. So we invite you to purchase in my grandmother's house. We're asking you to let's dig and read into these kind of things. Next week, I'm going to talk a little bit more about womanism and feminism and a few other things. But I hope that tonight was helpful as a Bible study, but in particular, the ways in which, and I really could have dug in it a whole nother kind of way, the ways in which a kind of toxic theology that we have, that myself, let me just close with this as Dr. Gina comes on. We've had grandmothers who should have been pastors.
My God.
We've had women on the motherboard who should have been deacons.
Yes.
We're talking about the ways in which we watch some of these women. We are now riding in on their shoulders. We are now the beneficiaries of the work that they have done. But we know that we are not as the scripture said. She is I believe Elizabeth said about Mary. She's more righteous than I am. And so there were women before us who should have. Should have achieved, should have been professors, and Yolanda Pierce should not have to be the first Black woman, first woman dean of Howard.
No, ma'am. And I won't be the last. I will not be the last.
What?
Because you said move the needle.
Yes, these are systems in which we ride in on now. And so don't believe your own press.
Yes.
That you were just so wonderful. No, somebody cracked the door open. Crack the door wide open for us to step in. But there were other women. And so that's what we're talking about. Our grandmothers who had the great gifts. They taught us scripture, taught us how to preach, taught us how to pray by the testimony.
By the testimony.
We learned to preach by listening to Black women testify. That's an art form. Can you testify? If you can't testify, you can't preach. It follows a certain form. You got to make a shout on the testimony.
What are those structures and powers? So some of our grandmothers and our aunties, they were artists. They just didn't have a canvas. So some of them were painters. Some of them would have been CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, right? But they didn't have the opportunity because someone looked at them and then someone looked at the boy child and they gave the boy child the opportunity. And so all we're saying is this is not about individuals. This is about the systems and structures. But so this is the preach word, because now it's good to me, right? Mm-hmm. We can dismantle some systems, and we have the power to dismantle. We have the power to do some deconstruction. I don't want to be the first of anything, and I'm not going to be the last of anything, because too many people are on the other side of my obedience. Too many other people are coming after me. And so I thank you for such a powerful word, and thank you, Dr. Stewart, for hosting us.
Yes. By all means, absolutely. Dr. Stewart, we are in your house right now. We're in your house.
Keep going. Keep going. It feels real churchy to me.
Yes.
Thank you so much tonight, Dr. Weems and Dr. Pierce.
Yes.
You have, Reverend Renita, dissected and dismantled tonight. And deconstructed.
And keep on
Thanks be to God. Thanks be to God. But seriously, thank you so much. I mean,
and somebody put up that disrupted.
And of course, you don't come without disruption. We already know disruption is a part of the agenda. But I want to ask the women if you'll just show your appreciation in the chat. I know you've already been doing that. If you could just thank them. And we also want to mention that Dr. Pierce will be our guest preacher for our, what is typically, we call it Hats Off to Mother's Tea. We don't know what we're gonna call it this year, but it will be, she's gonna be our speaker for that on the 8th of May. The 8th of May, it will be at 12 noon, and there will be additional information provided about that. But I'm looking forward to that. So mark your calendars and make plans to join us. We all